Hey everyone, thanks for joining Learn to Play Games. My name is Lance, and today I'm going to teach you how to play Baron Voodoo. This is a brand new one by Yoka by Some and Lucky Duck Games. It is a 2 to 4 player game that takes roughly half an hour to an hour to play, and is a competitive game where the players are competing with each other to gain the most points, and the player at the end of the game that has the most points will be the overall winner. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to play, starting with components, setup, player turns, and endgame conditions. I was able to work very closely with Lucky Duck Games to make sure that all the rules presented here are correct in the way that they want them to be. As always, if you find these videos helpful, if you like what I do, please consider hitting that like button, subscribing to my channel. It's one of the easiest ways you can support channels like mine, so we can continue to grow and produce these videos. If you also want to stay up to date on all my videos, also consider ringing that bell so you get notifications anytime I release new stuff. So let's head to the table, and I'll teach you how to play. There are 48 soul dice included in the game, which are broken down into 5 different colors: teal, purple, yellow, red, and white. Each die is going to have a different icon on each one of its sides, and I'll go into more detail about what these icons can do later in the video. There are 4 different Loa included in the game, and each one has its own unique ability, which I'll go into more detail on later in the video. Each Loa's board is broken down into 2 sections. The top section with all the color is the capture section, where you're going to be placing dice once you capture them. Then later on, you can also convert dice, as there's a easy reference guide here on the side, and then you'll get points for those and move them down into their spirit worlds. For board setup, there's a few different ways you can do this. The first way is random, where you're going to simply roll the dice and quickly place them on the board in a random fashion, not really paying attention to the symbols. Alternatively, you can take turns where each player will be placing a die on the board, and again, you're going to match up the color of the die based on the color on the board. So yellow dice will go in the yellow spots, red dice will go in the red spots, and so on. Now, there's also 2 modes in the back of the rule book: the balanced and chaos mode, as you can see here, and these are preset boards that you can set up and play a more strategic game if you're looking for that. So in my example, I'm simply going to roll the dice and place them out on the board. And again, you can do this in any manner, rolling all of them or rolling them separate, however you want to do it. I'm just going to roll them separately and place them out. So first off, the white dice will go into all of the white sections. And then I will do these and simply place them out in their spots. One important note with this: the black spot in the middle of the board will not have a die placed during setup. For player setup, each player will choose a Loa that they want to play and will receive that Loa's board, a cube that they're going to place on the 0 mark, the color protection token for that, and they're going to place it on the inactive side, and they're also going to receive 3 of the offering tokens. And then the final things you want to do is place the Baron Samini token out somewhere, as well as the extra tokens. And for this video, I'll be using a Crystal Fortress pod set. If you want to know more about those, I'll have a link in the description below to their website. And then the final thing is to select a starting player, and you can do this in any manner you want to. The rulebook states the oldest player, but you can do any method you'd like. Then I would also make a suggestion. I would also leave out the player boards even if you're not playing a 4-player game, as you will always have access to all 4 of the special abilities for the lulls. So you could keep them off to the side or whatever, but I would recommend having them out as a reference for players so that they all know that they can use those abilities as normal. And I'll show you how that works in a second. Baron Voodoo is played over an undefined number of turns. Starting with the first player and proceeding in clockwise manner, each player is going to get to take a turn, and during their turn, they must capture a die, and then we'll also have a number of different optional actions they can take. This is going to continue until one of the endgame conditions is met, which is either one of the players reaches a specific score based on the number of players that are playing, or if one player is unable to capture the dice, that will trigger the end of the game, where you will complete the rest of the turn so that all players have an equal number of turns, and then you'll move into the scoring step to determine which player has the most points and is the overall winner of the game. And the final thing before getting into the game is that I want to go through each one of the Loa's powers and explain how they work. So the first one I'll look at is Mami Wata, and with hers, she is going to choose a row or column and move all of the dice to one side of that column. You are not going to change the facings of these dice or shift them in any other way. So for example, let's say that we want to move this row here, and we're going to move it towards her board. So we're simply going to move all of the dice over to that end, keeping them in the same order and the same facing. Looking at another example, let's go ahead and say that we want to move this row up this way. So again, we'll shift all of these dice forward to the edge of that row. And this works the same no matter which direction you go. Next we have Frida's power, and with hers she is going to swap 2 isolated dice on the board. So first off, let me define isolated. All this means is that the die is not part of a column of 2 or 3. It is simply a die by itself on the board, which at the beginning of the game, all of the dice are isolated. So with that being said, let's go ahead and show a couple of examples of this. So I'm going to go ahead and swap this die here with this one over here, simply changing positions of those. Or for another example, let's say that I have this one here and I'm going to swap it with this one here. And that is her power. With Baron's ability, it allows him to take all of the dice in a column and place them on other dice on the board, except for the die that is on the board itself. So for example, if I choose this column here, I can take these top 2 die, not the die on the board, and place them on other dice that I want to. And I can even split these up. I have to keep the facings the same though. So let's go ahead and say that I place one here, and then I'll place this one over here. I can do this with a column of 2 dice as well, taking the top one, leaving the one that's on the board, and placing that elsewhere. And finally, with Papa's ability, it allows him to move a single die anywhere in a row to an empty space. So for example, let's go ahead and say that I wanted to go after this spirit die here. I can go ahead and move his die from this space over to this space here, as that is an empty space, and that was a single die. Likewise, let's go ahead and say instead that I did not want somebody else to gain this die here. I can go ahead and move that die to another spot on that same row. Or if I had an open spot here, let's go ahead and say that I wanted to move this die instead. I could shift this one all the way down here to that spot there. For my game, I've chosen Mami Wata to be the starting player, and so at the beginning of each player's turn, the first step is an optional one, where the player can choose to use their Lol's power for free, or alternatively, they can spend an offering token, returning it to the general supply, to use any one of the Lol's powers. Once you've completed using a Lol's power or choose not to, then you're going to move on to the second step, which is capturing a die. This step must be done, and there are 4 general rules for this. The first is that you can only use dice of your color. So with Mami Wata, she is yellow, so we can only use yellow dice to capture other dice. The second rule is you can only capture orthogonally adjacent dice. So if we look at an example of this, we have this yellow die here. It is orthogonally adjacent to the purple die above it, the purple die to its left, the white die below it, and the red die to its right. The third rule is that you must have an open space adjacent to the die you wish to capture as you're jumping over that die to capture it. An open space can be any space that doesn't have a die on it or that has up to 2 dice stacked on it. So for example, in this situation, I could still jump on this as the highest you can go in a column is 3 dice. So I could do that, but if we had another die on here, I could not jump this red die as there are 3 dice in that column already, and that is the maximum number of dice you can have in a column. You're also never allowed to move off of the board. So for example, with this yellow die down here, I cannot capture that purple die as I would have to jump over it landing outside of the board, and I'm not allowed to do that. And the final rule is that you can only use a die that is accessible, meaning that you cannot choose a die that is underneath another die. So if I had this red die on top of here, I could not use that yellow die to try to capture as it is inaccessible due to another die being on top of it. Only the top die, whether it's on a column or not, is accessible. So again, if we look at another example, let's go ahead and say that we had this one here. I can use that yellow die to capture another die as it is the top die of a column, and so it is accessible. From here, let me take you through a few more examples of this. So for this example, I'm going to look at this yellow die here, and so I cannot capture this white die as I would have to jump over it landing outside of the board. So I cannot do that. I also cannot capture this die over here as it is not adjacent to my die. There is an empty space between us. If the die was over here, then I could and land into that space. I can capture the purple die above me as I will leap over that into this space here, capturing it. And I also cannot capture this green die as the space that I would land in is full as it has a column of 3 dice and there never can be more than 3 dice in a column. I could alternatively though use this die to jump over here and capture this green die if that was the one I really wanted. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and use my yellow die here to jump over this purple die and capture it. When you capture a die, you will not change its facing and you will simply add it to the top of your board into your capture area. Once you've captured a die, there are 5 additional optional actions you can take which are done in order. The first one is if you capture a die of your color, of your lowest color, so for example with Mami Wata, if I would have captured a yellow die, then you will gain 1 offering token from the reserve and add it to your collection. The second action you can take is to spend one of these offering tokens to change your die that you captured to any facing that you want. The third step is to apply the effect of the die you captured. Now this again is an optional step, but in case you do not apply the effect of the die during the turn you capture it, the effect is going to be lost. And for these examples, I'm going to use the yellow dice as it is this player's turn, but this applies to any die color, and I'll have that up on the screen for you. So the first one are the offering symbols, and with these, anytime you capture one of those, you're going to gain another offering token from the supply and add it to your area. The next one is the flame symbol, and when you gain one of these, you're going to add 1 point to your score track. The third one is the die changing symbol, which will allow you to change that die that you captured or any other die that you have in your captured area to any other symbol that you need. The fourth symbol is the protection symbol. When you capture a die with that symbol, you're going to flip your protection token over to its active side, and then from that point on until the beginning of your next turn, none of the other players can capture any of your colored dice that are on the board. They also cannot steal any dice from your spirit world, though they can still play the switch symbols to switch dice that you have captured in your capture zone. At the beginning of your next turn, you're going to flip your token back over to its inactive side. The fifth symbol is the steal symbol, and this one allows you to steal a die from an opponent's spirit world and add it directly to your spirit world. Now you will not get any effects from that die and you cannot use it to cash in and gain points, but it will help you at the end of the game to get points based on who has the most of each color die, as you will see. And the final symbol is the switch symbol, which allows you to switch a die either in your capture zone or any other opponent's capture zone with another opponent's die in a capture zone. So for example, if that opponent had that capture die, I could choose to switch these. Or if these two players had them, I could choose to switch those two players' capture dice. You are not allowed to do that with any dice in the player's spirit zone. Moving back into the optional actions you can take, the fourth one is that you can choose to spend 2 of your offering tokens to take an additional turn after this turn. This can only be done once per round, so if you choose to do this, you can only do this once. And the final optional action is to trade in your captured dice for victory points. There's a quick reference guide for this on the side of your board, and there's 2 different ways you can do this. The first way is to have the same symbol on different colored dice, and the other way is to have different symbols on the same color die. And you can do these in groupings of 2, 3, or 4. The more you have in the grouping, the more points it's going to be worth. So groupings of 2 are going to get you 1 victory point. Groupings of 3 will get you 3. And if you are able to get groupings of 4, you're going to get 5 victory points. Each time you do this, any dice in your captured zone that meet those requirements, you'll move down into your spirit zone and then get that number of victory points. So with mine, I would only get 1 victory point for that. The other important thing I want to go over are the white dice, as these are going to be considered wild for color only. So in this example, let's go ahead and say that I have captured these dice here, and then I have this one, and I want to trade them in for points. So I have a couple of different options. I can choose to use this as a part of this collection, as I have all the same symbol but different colors, and I can count this as a teal or purple die for that requirement, so I could cash that in and get 3 points, moving those down into my spirit world. Or I can use it on this side as I need different symbols but the same color, so again I can count that as purple and then cash that in, gaining my 3 points. The one other thing I want to point out with white dice is each time you capture white dice and place them in your spirit zone, you're going to total up those number of white dice you have and compare it with each other player's white dice that they have in their spirit zones. If you have the most white dice, then you're going to gain the Baron Smitty's token and place it over your player board. From this point on, as long as you have the token, whenever you use or you want to use a power, you can choose to use any player's power for free and not have to spend a token, including your own power. Now, a couple of other important notes with this is if another player, let's say that this player here had a couple of tokens or a couple of dice here in their capture zone, and then they moved them into their spirit zone. At this point, since both of our players are tied for 1 white die, then I lose control of the Baron and he is placed back in the area until somebody has the most white dice. Once you've completed performing any optional actions, the final step in your turn will depend on if you used your lul's power at the beginning of the turn or spent an offering token to use an opponent's. If you did not, then you are allowed to use your law's power now, or again spend an offering token to use one of your opponents. This is again optional, you do not have to do this, and is going to depend on if you use that power at the beginning of your turn. Once you've completed this, or choose not to, then it's going to move to the next player in clockwise order to take their turn. At this point, I want to show you one more example turn. So moving over to the next player in clockwise order, the red player, Papa, is going to go. And so he's going to start off his turn. He's not going to use his ability and move right into capture. So he's going to go ahead and jump over this one, capturing this die. And then right away, he gets a point for that because of the capture symbol on there. He is going to spend 2 of his tokens to take another turn after this. And at the end of the round, he is going to use his ability. He'll go ahead and move his red die all the way down here. Then starting his new turn again, I don't think I want to use his ability again this round. So then I am going to, let's see, I will go ahead and hop over this one, gaining the yellow die. And again, I gain another point for that. I can't spend any more of my offering tokens to take another turn, as you can never do more than 2 turns in a row. And I don't think I want to use my power again at this point. So that will be the end of my round, and I don't want to cash those in just yet. So that will finish off my turn, and it'll move over to the next player in clockwise order. The final thing I want to cover is endgame conditions and scoring. So first off, the game is going to end in one of 2 ways. Either when a player cannot capture a die during their turn, or when one of the players reaches a certain point on their scoring based on the numbers that are playing. For example, with this game, I'm playing a 4-player game, so if one of the players reaches a score of 12, that will trigger the end of the game. At that point, once the end of the game has been triggered, the rest of the players will get one final turn so that all players have had an equal number of turns, and then we'll move into scoring. So first off, any player that still has dice up in their capture area can move down one set of those dice to score, and then the rest of the sets will simply be moved down after that. So for example, with my player here, she has 2 sets that she could potentially move down, and so she's going to go ahead and move this set down instead so that she can get 3 points out of that. Then the other set of dice is simply just going to be moved down from there. Once all players are done with that, then the players are going to go around the table and determine who has the most of each color die except for white. White will not get you any bonus points. So for example, let's go ahead and start off with yellow. I have 3 with this player. That player has 1, and that player has 1. So if one player has the most of a particular color die, they're going to receive 3 points for that. If the players are tied, then they're only going to receive 1. So the next, I'll go with red. I have 2. This player has 2. That player has 1. And that player has 1. So each one of us would receive 1 point for that, for those of us that are tied. Moving on, I have 4 purples, 3 and 2, so I'll receive 3 more points. And finally, over to teal. That player has 3, and that one has 4, so this player will receive 3 points for that. If a player goes over 20, then simply take a 20-point token and place it down here and move your marker back to 0 and continue counting your score. From there, then the player that has the most points will be the overall winner of the game. And if there's a tie between players, then it is going to be the player that triggered the end of the game or the player closest to them in clockwise order. So let's look at a couple examples of this real quick. Let's go ahead and say that both of these players were tied for the highest score. This player was the player that triggered the end of the game, so that player would win by breaking that tie. Or in another example, let's go ahead and say that these 2 players were tied for the highest score. Then it would go to the player that is closest to the player that ended the game in clockwise order. So this player again ended the game. So in clockwise order, the yellow player would be the winner of that game. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my videos and leave me feedback on them. I do really appreciate it, and I take into account everything you say to make the best possible videos. If you found the video helpful, please also consider hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. It means the world to me and it really does help out. Until next time, I'll see you later.